came out to enter everybody's imagination and shut down those dusty roads. The voice of the old black woman floats above the shadows and trees, disembodied yet whole. It rides up there and cruises along the night birds circling above some unseen church or log cabin in some out-of-the-way location back in the bushes, hidden. The voice also circles, plaintive, haunting, achingly real. And if you had the privilege of hearing that voice, perhaps you wouldn't file it away as anything special, something to imitate and relate to for the rest of your life, a reference point for your own life's experiences, making you sensitive, alert, cognizant of other beautiful, necessary things. But that's the way Miles heard it. Perhaps the voice would remind you of a lonely trumpet sound, but maybe you wouldn't know that what you heard was special, because you couldn't see that old black woman's face. And if you could have met her, you might have been too busy watching her chaw on some snuff to see the wisdom in her old eyes. But Miles did see that face, saw it when he heard her voice. He saw the whole scene, took it all in, knew that it was real and special, and filed it away for later use. From the giddy-up, Miles's friends knew he saw and heard things they could never see or hear. They told me so, and so they protected him. He was allowed to be and do whatever was necessary for him as long as he was cool and didn't disrespect them by looking down on them. He never stuck his nose all up in the wind as if he smelled something foul when his homeboys walked into a room. No, he never treated them that way. Even when he was looking down from the elevated heights they had helped him to climb, he never cultivated an attitude that would have angered or hurt them. He was always just one of the boys, even if they knew, and he knew, he was also apart from them. His fame never got in the way. His East St. Louis homeboys were his best friends up to the day he died. He trusted and knew them, and they trusted and knew him. To them, he was always Little Davis, or Junior, or Dewey, or Buckwheat, a name he hated because it alluded to the blackness of his skin, which he was sensitive about all his life. But some of his old friends called him that anyway, despite his protests, because that's what they called him back in East St. Louis, when they were all young and full of piss and vinegar and thrived on insulting each other to see who was the strongest. St. Louis and East St. Louis were, and still are, great trumpet towns. That's because there were so many march and drum and bugle corps bands which were part of a tradition brought over to St. Louis by Germans from their fatherland, although I don't ever recall seeing a white drum and bugle corps marching band. That's not to say there weren't any, I just never saw one. But it was the black marching bands in St. Louis and East St. Louis who put their distinctive stamp on the tradition. The high-stepping kicks and the swaying back and forth of the bugles as they were played were black innovations, and who raised the practice almost to a high art form. Based in individual black communities and sponsored by local African-American chapters of the Elks and various Masonic orders, these marching bands would liven up the streets on weekends during the spring, summer, and early fall, and I remember them with great fondness. I looked forward with anticipation whenever word came down that they would be gracing my St. Louis neighborhood with their sounds and presence. These bands developed a style of playing the bugle, later transferred to the cornet and trumpet, that became known as the St. Louis running style. Pioneered by Eddie Randall, Levi Madison, Harold Shorty Baker, and Clark Terry, Miles's real first mentor in trumpet style, and perfected by Miles, who, in his youth, had played in several East St. Louis marching bands. It was characterized by musical ideas, chords, and notes strung together in a continuous blowing, dialoguing